وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to another Ihsan Foundation for West Africa webinar for the benefit of the greater community. Inshallah, today our guest is Habeeb Quadri. The topic is Prophetic Leadership, Lessons from the Seerah. And the title of the webinar is actually derived from a new book, mashallah, that he has put out. In terms of a brief introduction, he is an accomplished educator, author, and youth activist with a strong background in education. He serves as the superintendent of the MCC, Muslim Community Center Academy in Morton Grove, Illinois, and is actively involved in promoting educational initiatives within the Muslim community. He is dedicated to educational excellence, youth empowerment, and community development. Before we jump in, I encourage anyone and everyone to please make sure, other than getting a copy of his book, Prophetic Leadership, but please also visit the ihsanfoundation.org website and support any of our projects, all of our projects, whatever pulls on your heartstrings. The specific one that I would encourage is, of course, there's always a soft spot for every Muslim for supporting orphans. The Prophet taught us, والسلام, whoever supports an orphan will be like this with me in the hereafter. And he didn't specify a number. He didn't say 1,000 orphans, or he just said one orphan. Support an orphan, and the reward is more than you can imagine. $50 will cover the needs of an orphan for a month in West Africa. So please, again, stop by the website. And if you're going to support anything, I recommend starting there. And then the love for Ihsan will grow, and it'll expand to other projects, inshallah. But I recommend that as the starting point. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the figurative mic to Principal Habeeb. He'll offer some gems of benefit for all of us, inshallah, and then I'll hop back in for a dialogue afterwards. Go ahead, Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasul al-Kareem. First and foremost, Sheikh Bilal, Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward the work you are doing, especially doing in the areas that sometimes or don't get the support that they need. So please make sure everyone who is watching, that this is something that we could put in effort. Inshallah, I include myself in this and our family to also help support this after this meeting, because this is my also first time to get to know more about this organization. So may Allah reward you. What I want to do is I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, our Q&A, but even Q&A with the Sheikh. But I also just want to kind of give you an example of, there's about, I had the opportunity to work with youth, to work with education, and work in schools and leadership for some time. And a lot of times you read research and books about other communities and other authors and what they've done, and kind of self-help books on leadership. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the best of examples, we got to go to the individual that has got 1.5 billion people right now following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala due to this one individual. So how do you make people from where they started from? That means there are lessons that we can learn. Lessons we can learn from a social emotional situation, which is right now very important. The idea of leadership, about family. So I felt like to really go through from and looking at what people say what's great leadership, and realize that our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught all of this. So I wanted to kind of just maybe take one or two stories, not a lot. I want to just take only 15, 20 minutes, and that way from about 4:20 to about 4:45, we have time for Q&A. Maybe I'll take another 4:25 max. But I wanted to kind of give you guys an example. So I want to take one of the first, after the preface of the book, there's a chapter where we start off with the Cave of Hira. And you might think to yourself, okay, what is it? See, a lot of us know, like when you look in Bukhari and you go on the book of Wahi, everyone knows that starting part, right? Read. I can't read. Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, right? So, which we all know. The part I want to say even before that, what is something that we could learn? That the Prophet ﷺ used to go to and seclude himself in the Cave of Hira. Self-reflection. That is something we realize even Ibrahim alayhi used to have that time for self-reflection. So one thing we all can learn is the idea of secluding yourself and having some me time. And think about now you have mindfulness has become a big thing. This idea of taking some time, and even you see great leaders in just in the Western world, they'll say that 5-10 minutes to just go and they just talk. They'll have mind games of kind of planning out. Athletes now sit down and kind of figure out their day or plan out the game plan. So this is something that all of us as individuals, as families, leaders of our families, fathers, mothers, that you have to have time to just self-reflect where you are. your own muhasabah of what's going on plays a big part. So I think that becomes number one. Number two, the site of the first revelation. The other aspect, before I mean the revelation again, I want us to think about this. Before the revelation, what's the second that we could learn? The idea that the Prophet Muhammad would walk, and if everyone's gone there, this is not an easy hike. This is before trails. This is before Nike gym shoes. This is before the nice hats, right? With water bottles, everything, phones, navigation. You had to walk all the way up. So the other thing as individuals, even before in our deen, is to take care of ourselves, physical health. The idea of exercising, the idea of taking care of ourselves also will make you a better father, better leader, better imam, better teacher, better whatever you are, because if you are in good health, you can maximize the potential Allah has given you in whatever idea or skill sets that you are really good at. So that's the number two kind of thing I wanted to kind of think about. Now we'll get to the part where the idea of the Allah through Angel Jibreel talks to Prophet Sallallahu, reminds him to read. So one is ourselves, that we have to encourage that we are keep on learning, looking at the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring yaqeen in our hearts. So that's why everything that we see of creation, there is goods we can learn, or things we know why we don't need to do what we have to do or go stay away from. So that's another aspect that I want us to realize, that first is that self-reflection, then the idea of the physical aspect, and then the making sure the intellectual aspect and the cognitive of constantly learning our deen, as ulama, our shuyukh, like we have here, who constantly are reminding us, and they're all learning because they're learning to teach others, right? So this idea of learning and encouraging others to learn is very important. It wasn't just to have, but to read. And then the Prophet passed that on and just say, look, no one reads, just always ask me. The idea was to grow, 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 grow. The fourth thing I want us to kind of think about is after revelation, going to Khadija radiallahu anha. I want us to think about this. Something amazing at that moment. He doesn't realize it's amazing. A very shocking, terrifying thing at that moment for him. He's panicking. He doesn't know what's happened to him. He now could go to Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an, which he knew at that time. He could have gone to Abu Talib. He could have gone to any one of his uncles and said, something's happened. He decides to go to his wife, right? And says, cover me, cover me. So what do we learn here? This idea of having strong family relation is very important for also success. This idea of keeping relationships. So when you have time, you need to have that like, I'm back old school, so ride or die person, like that one who just be there for you all the time. And we could have that at the house, your wife who could console you, and vice versa. You have to be that for her. Do you have to be that for your son or for your daughter? So this idea of constant learning plays a big part. So that's one. The second thing is this reaffirming of her, right? Support, she goes, I think something bad has happened to me. And she said, Allah will never disown you. Why? Then she gives 4 reasons, right? You help the poor, the destitute, the guests, you honor the guests, you have a good relationship with the kids, with your families, right? And the last one is and when some calamity happens to someone, you take care of it. All those 4 are mu'amalat issues. Not even Allah. That when you help Allah's creation, Allah will help you. Say that one more time. When you help Allah's creation, Allah will help you. So I want us to realize how beautiful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the areas and stories that we learn from the Seerah of the Prophet of how many things there are that we can learn. I'm not even talking about like Iqra, the Quran right now. I'm just saying the Prophet is an example. So those were a few things I just want to kind of clarify. I'm going to give you one more sample, then we could kind of open it up. And if Sheikh, then we could kind of go from there. But again, self-reflection was one. As a teacher, I'm always one of those repeaters, right? Physical health, this idea of learning, encouraging others to learn. Number 4, having a rock at the house, or having a place where your wife could feel comfortable that she could talk to you, or family members, your parents, where they're not like you're all over in the community. Everyone's like, oh, you the man. And at home, everyone's kind of not happy when you walk inside the house. So Allah protect all of us. Allah guide us all. I'm going to give another example of another chapter I did. Again, I was trying to give you some samples here. And let me see, like here, we'll go through the journey of Taif, right? Now, I want us to think about something else here. One we could learn is that in all of us will need support and help. Sometimes from a financial standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from economical standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint. So you have to find people. And sometimes some people will be Muslim or not. The Prophet went to die if there weren't Muslims at that time. So this idea for us to realize that we are all learning, get support. The Prophet's, one of his supporters was Abu Talib, who wasn't a Muslim. So the idea that you can have allies is nothing wrong. And even in whatever your workplace, you have to have with people. You can't think it's all of you or just your own family. And that's who I only work with. Even I'm going to have that nepotism in your workplace and stuff. You have to find out that every person, there could be some benefit and support and help. And we have to find that. Number two, meeting the people. The idea now from a religious standpoint, our thing is to spread the message. Spread the message with our akhlaq, our character. And think about the way the Prophet did it, even though they denied him. But the akhlaq and the way he dealt with them, and he made dua for them, later on they became Muslim. So this idea of how we always take the higher road. If we take the higher road, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put barakah in it. Number three, kids throwing stones. Dealing with negative views and experiences. We are all going to have some people who are going to hear, going to be some negative Nancy's. People are going to make some comments. How do we balance and go through and protect will play a big part. And so, sir, that's another thing that I want us to kind of keep in mind regarding our views, our experiences. That becomes very important. Number four, dua to Allah. You see, at that time, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Angel Jibreel said, you know what? I could come take care of these people. I could come and take care of these people. What does the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? He makes dua and he starts off, Ya Allah, are you happy with me? Is there something I could have done? Coming back to us, what we sometimes as individuals do, we're always like, yeah, that's them. It's about time. Angel, let them have it. Let the wrath of God have it. But he decided not to. And he made dua and he looked at the positive aspect of it. Maybe if Allah's mercy that the future generations can. And that's something that we have to look at, that we always need to make dua and say, Ya Allah, you make dua and tell me what's best. Give me what's best for me. Think what's best. I will be with you. I'll be patient. I'm going to make this happen. So that's something else that we could learn. Angel Jibreel visits him, right? That the whole revenge we kind of talked about. Having hope for the future, as I just kind of talked about, right? And you see that dua, not taking revenge, looking at it the positive thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets him up, right? And now when he comes there, you have another Uqba servant comes, gives him dates, right? You see people slowly, it just kind of kicks in their minds. And even there when he leaves, that's the same time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him an opportunity where jinns come and meet him. And now you have another group of people like, well, we want to learn. Allah in his own ways, that when we try to do our best, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of the rest. And that's what we have to kind of keep in mind. And so these were just kind of few small samples of about 11 chapters where I take each one, kind of break it down, explain what we can learn, separate from the seerah, have that, right? But just as individuals that we can learn, because the seerah of the Prophet is about a way of life for us. And so the whole idea was to kind of take some things, looking at it from a religious standpoint, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us or protect us and give us there. So this is just something I want to kind of open up for Q&A. If not, I could give more. So you tell me, Sheikh. I'm giving you a time here. I'm a person of time. So when you say 10 minutes, I'm a 10-minute kind of guy. So it's about 4:16. You tell me how. If you have any questions right here on this one, if you want me to share some more, I'm welcome to. So Sheikh Bilal, take it away.
Jazakallah khair. I think what you shared is already has so much protein. It already has so much benefit and nutrition. There's more than enough, I think, to reflect on, to process, to digest. Really beneficial, food for thought, soul food, right? You mentioned something that I just want to make, like, it's a very simple connection, but I just want to make it briefly. You mentioned how it's one of those moments in the seerah, every time you come across it, it forces you to pause and say, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. How in the world was the Prophet not asking Jibreel alayhi salam to just, he would have been justified. He's not, he like, it's amazing how, and I wanna, thread the needle in connecting that story specifically with the broader ayah that mentions that we have the best example in the Prophet, right? Fi Rasulillahi uswatun hasana. Um, and it's interesting, right after that, by the way, in the ayah, in Surah Ahzab, Allah says, there's the best example in the Prophet, in the Messenger of Allah, for whoever has hope in the day of judgment and remembers Allah often. So like, subhanallah, there's those like points that Allah follows that with, following the example of the Prophet should increase my hope in Allah and the day of judgment, and I should become a person who also spreads that sunshine of hope with those around me. Don't be you mentioned what, negative Nancy or Debbie Downer, or like, subhanallah, that you find the Prophet, going back to this specific example, one of the most amazing things I find about the Prophet, you find him, even if he had a valid option to respond in a certain way, in retaliation, in, um, you know, it could have been justifiable in a number of instances, but you find the Prophet embodying this concept that, like, sometimes someone may respond to something and it may be valid, but then later on, days, weeks, months, years, they look back and they say, even if that was acceptable, it was still the B plus response, not the A plus. Like, it may have been okay, but maybe it would have been better if I responded a little bit differently, if I kind of polished my response a little bit more. One of the most amazing things about the Prophet, you never have him like responding impulsively and then later on regretting it.
Oh.
Like, subhanallah, alayhi salatu wasalam. So, I just want to connect those two, how incredible. And later on, when Sayyidah Aisha would ask the Prophet, this is later towards the end of his life, was the day of Uhud the most difficult day of your life? When there was the counterattack, when chaos was, the Quraysh, they wreaked havoc on the Muslims. There was a counterattack by Khalid bin Walid, who wasn't Muslim yet. And the Prophet almost died. He lost a tooth. Some of his chainmail, some of his armor was like, he got hit so hard he was knocked unconscious, and some of the armor was embedded in his face, such that after things eventually settled down, and the Prophet survived, and Abu Sufyan leaves, and so one of the 10 companions from his paradise, Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, when he's pulling the armor out of the Prophet's face, he actually loses two teeth. So later, Sayyidah Aisha asked him, was that the most difficult day of your life? He said, no, it was the day of Ta'if. Subhanallah. So this was literally the lowest point of his life. He's given the valid option. Do you want them to just be completely destroyed? And the Prophet responds, like, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how is he thinking in this way when the blood hasn't even dried yet, his own blood? He responds, this ties in with, the theme of your book, prophetic leadership. How much was the Prophet concerned with the youth as a topic? What's the Prophet thinking? Maybe their youth will become Muslim. Maybe their next generation will accept the message. Maybe they'll believe in La ilaha illallah. Eventually, they do. And this is like literally prophetic. Now, the number one place for the best quality roses in the world is Ta'if. Subhanallah. So, like, if you get musk and it has the rose fragrance, and they came from Ta'if, like, that's in the 90s, you could have had a pair of sneakers, you could have had some Jordans. I mean, it's just different. So, I mean, there are many thoughts, but what are some thoughts that you have, either in connection with this or anything else that you mentioned?
Yeah, and you brought up a point here, and this is where, a lot of times I work with individuals, and Allah has blessed me to go visit a lot of communities, and I always tell people, after the Quran, the second greatest miracle was the prophet's character, right? In the sense of just following, right? In the sense of to see how he just went through stuff and let it be, like having mom, dad pass away, all the siblings pass away, kids pass away except one before him, right? So you'll see that there's challenges after challenges. That's why I always say, look, what is the outside sin of the Prophet? Growing a beard, inshallah, wearing, things that he's done. But the toughest sunnah to follow would be his character,
Yeah.
right? Like, we're good at ibadat sometimes. I'm like, but muamalat, I'm like, come on. How do we learn how to get better, right? How do we become better business people? How do we become at the masjid get along with each other? How do we become our husband and wives kind of go through moments and be like, all right, right? There are things that when I realized that that's such a key that we're always like, hey, we always listen to that. That's why my whole problem is I'm not talking about, okay, the ibadah aspect of the prophet. I just want to be like, look, this is also ibadah. What he went through, you get hasanat. A lot of times kids don't think that. I'm like, do you understand that you're playing basketball? Like I'm a big sports guy, and I'm like, hey guys, before we play the game, you make dua. There's barakah in this because you're remembering Allah. In the game, someone kind of elbows you and you want to push back or you want to give them a right one, like maybe a pickup game, and you don't do that, Allah rewards you. You want to cuss, you want to cuss, you want to swear, like in like, talking trash, or you want to come to another whole level, but you don't do that because you know that Allah doesn't love that. That's hasanat. The kid's like, well, yeah, even playing ball, there's worship, right? Wearing proper attire, covering your navel to your knees, and playing ball, you get hasanat because you're doing it the proper way and not just saying shirts versus skins kind of thing, right? And when kids and we start thinking this way, that Allah's trying to get us so many ways to get into Jannah and say through our beloved Prophet and say, hey, when has he sent you the Quran? And then if you follow the way he worshiped me, it's on, right? So, and that's something just
Yeah.
inshallah to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, really, that is the crux of the message of the Prophet, the example of the Prophet ﷺ, as he emphasized himself. He himself said, I was primarily or only sent to perfect noble character, right? He also mentioned, you'll appreciate this, God bless you, as an educator, right? I was only sent as a teacher. So his job was a teacher. What subject though? A teacher is okay. If someone is a teacher, what do they teach? He specified himself. My main subject is character. Now, what I find beautiful about that doesn't negate or remove the ibadat. It just puts things into perspective that if you're checking these boxes, I say that in a good way, of different prayers and fasting, extra prayers, extra fasting, charity, extra charity, hajj, umrah, so on and so forth. MashaAllah, reading Quran, reciting Quran, all of that is good. Is it or is it not pointing the compass of your character in the direction of the Prophet? Because he actually warned us in, for example, Ramadan. Don't be like the person who the only thing they get from fasting is hunger. The only thing they get from praying at night is fatigue and exhaustion. What the Prophet is teaching us is if you're only limiting the ibadat to only that, and it doesn't, I mean, think about it. If someone is praying so much at night that they're actually tired the next day, you would think, okay, that's a good thing. Yes, if you have to connect the puzzle pieces, if it's connected with good character. Everything you do, every act of worship is in limbo. It depends on your character. So if it's connected with good character, then there's a very good chance for it to be accepted, inshallah. But if someone is praying and if someone is fasting and then they're not careful with their tongue, they're not careful with their words or how they treat people, right? How they, not just in the community, that's important, but what's more important at home, right? You find the Prophet saying that the best among you are those who are best to their families, and I'm the one who's best to my family. He's teaching us, like, you got to look at behind closed doors. And what he's emphasizing is the hardest thing. In a sense, it's kind of easier for someone to show a good face outside. That's important. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, all right, let me go be a jerk in the masjid and in the workplace, and then be nice at home. No, of course, that's not the point. The Prophet is saying, yes, that's important. The real work, though, is at home behind closed doors. And what is that really focusing on is character, is akhlaq.
Yeah. And look, and I think it's the idea is like, hey, all care, spots, right? And I worry sometimes, like the beauty of our deen, it's from all these countries. Like at our school, we have 56 different countries, mashallah,
You said
right?
50.
56. We got 56 different countries in our school. We're 900 kids, mashallah, in Chicago, around the north of Chicago, which is beauty. But that means there are cultural things and then what's the deen. And that's why it's so important that if we manifest exactly what the prophet told us, you'll see so many kids not have this question. Like, a lot of times I see some girls like, oh, this faith is so strict and have that. But a lot of times it's the way they're presented to them, how parent, mom, dad just get on them, right? If I just tell them, it's like, do you understand when his daughter came by, he would stand up and kiss her on the cheek and have her sit down where she sat? And we're in our culture, like, go get the chai, right? Right? That not have the relationship, and they're saying, well, this is how our deen was. That think about that. Even like Aisha radiallahu anha was a scholar. Like she taught, hey, this is what the prophet did. Like this idea of learning. And so sometimes with kids, also that's why it's so important. Like, no, I want you to really read the seerah, not by what you see and saying that is the deen. Because if there's beauty in our culture, it's not, and then also it's not there. Just like the idea of kids. I have a chapter about when he's dealing with kids and like some samples. But the idea, so I'll give you examples. I'm a principal. So what I do is on Fridays, I dress up, right? So I have funny outfits on. So, now kids, when they walk by me, sometimes they're gonna be like, oh my God, Mr. Khadi, you're very silly, right? So there was about 7 principals in the first 14 years at the school I became principal. So alhamdulillah, now I'm there about 24 years. But when I first got there, so I was like, no, I'm gonna get these kids. I'm like, hey, high five. So, because I'm setting myself up to be a little funny, they're gonna be like, hey, you're silly principal. Are you so funny, Mr. Qadi? Right? So a parent with good intentions, and I think it was good. It was good. And she's like, brother Qadi, I think it's nice, but you know what? The way you kind of have that, they calling you stuff like that, like, oh my God. Because when back home, when we saw the principal, we wouldn't look down. We wouldn't even look at the principal. We didn't want to be around the principal. We don't want to look at that. We had so much fear. We had so much fear out of him, respected him out of fear. And I said, that's great. And I said, the word you just said is the one part. I said, I understand our culture back home and like the authoritarian, but tell me that's not my teacher. I love my culture. But I say, what did our teacher do? Tell me one hadith when the Prophet walked around and the kids all ran away from him. Our people didn't want to be by him. I said, the idea was that everyone thought that he loved him the most. That 2 seconds, right? Even that one hadith where he asked one and said, the same one, and he said, Aisha, the father of Aisha, right? He started getting, he's like, okay, maybe I'm not coming up. I better just stop. But in his mind, he's like, man, we boys, right? At another whole level. And that's the beauty of our deen. And so this whole character is like, which I may have you brought up. It's like, look, there's this whole family component. We got to go back what our prophet did. With the friends, with community, encouraging, looking at people at different levels. Where someone said, I want to commit zina. Where we ever brought that up to her, like when we wrote the book War Within the Hearts, the Struggle of the Muslim Youth, people are like, man, Mr. Q, why did you think of like the clubs, dating? I said, because I thought of the same question. Right. And back then when I asked, people would be like, haram, why? Just why are you asking these questions? What's this? What's not coming in your head?
Yeah.
I'd be like, man, am I the only like haram guy? Right. But when I wrote the book, kids like, man, I was always thinking the same thing. I was like, yeah, because our deen has answers for it. The prophet, like, if the guy comes up and says, I want to commit, and the prophet said, haram alayk, you want to go out burn fire? But he asked him, like, hey, do you have a sister? Do you have a mother? Do you have a like this process? If this happened to your mom, would you want this to be done? And not in the proper way, the process, right? Bringing that. Then putting your hand on that man and making dua for him. That's a G, right? I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Like, that's the way our beloved. And so that's why a lot of times, even our own things, like our culture gets so mixed up with deen that sometimes they don't realize what's there. And I'm like, man, this Allah's trying to get us, finding ways to get us in the Jannah, inshallah, guide us all in there and forgive our mistakes. And that's where I really do believe that we have to have no doubt about it. We have consequences, accountability, and no problem that's in our deen. But really, if people really show what we have, and you saw some places in the world, like I'm from India. India wasn't through force; it was just through trade that people became Muslim.
Yeah.
Right? So subhanallah. So it's a beauty. Sheikh, what you were just saying.
And India has a huge population, a huge Muslim population for many, many, many centuries, and you have amazing luminary scholars, past, present, and inshallah future. Uh, and then you also look at Indonesia, you look at Malaysia, you look at like people within the Muslim community. I think there needs to be a rediscovery of who the prophet was in connection with his leadership, in connection with his character, in connection with his example. Even when you look at that's actually prophetic leadership. The young man comes to him. The fact that that man even felt comfortable enough and the prophet was approachable enough to go to him and open up and say, I'm really struggling. And he even brought it. If you think about it, he could have just done and did it, gone and did it, right? But he didn't. Something in him, there's this internal hidden wrestling match between his nafs and his iman and this and he thought, okay, let me go to the prophet and open up. You don't do that if you don't feel the kindness and love of that person before that internal wrestling match kicks off that day.
Mm-hmm.
He already knew who the prophet was. The prophet's reputation was already that he was kind and loving and merciful and approachable. And he's not gonna smack you upside the back of the head if you go to him. And you know, if you contextualize it now, if a teenager goes to their dad, all my friends, for example, let's say they're going to public school, all my friends are going to prom, even the Muslim ones. Can I go to prom too? So this is where we can plug MCC, for parents to enroll their kids if they're looking for an alternative. But the point is, this person went to the prophet. I'm struggling with XYZ. And then, like you highlighted, how did the prophet respond? He didn't hit him. He didn't yell at him. He didn't make dua. He didn't make dua against him. He got on his level. Okay, let me communicate in a way with this person in a way that's going to actually be effective. The desired outcome is to steer them away from it. Okay, how can we get there? Let's try this and see if this works. And it did. And the Prophet made dua for him. And subhanAllah. So you have, how there are the different love languages, right? So you have the words of affirmation, and then you have the human touch, the Prophet, like the quality time you have all of this is just one story, one of many. And I love what you mentioned in your example of dressing up on Fridays. The kids, they get the message because you have different learning styles, right? Some are visual, some are auditory, some are kinesthetics. So you have the visual learners, especially Mr. Q he looks different. And so it's going to resonate and register with them. Question, have you had students come back who are like, now they're married with kids and they're like, hey, way back when you used to do this, I look back and I really appreciated that. Do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I mean, mashallah, we have about 45 of our graduates' kids are at our school now, right? And two of our board members are also alumni. So it's funny that now I've been there for 20 years, so I have now all those kids who graduated, their kids are at the school. So it's funny because they have pictures and saying, hey, like, hey, I have a picture with you, and because we have this whole thing like student of the week where we just every kid is one time recognized in front of the whole assembly, like favorite food, favorite color, like so this way that everyone's like not just the athletes or the kid who recites really well. And so I think it's always kind of good to see and saying, hey, like we remember this. Or that when we have after school activities, my whole thing is like, how do we know things are going well? Like if people don't want to come back, right? And if people want to come back, that is huge, right? Because you want them to have this. And that's why I always say, if the shepherd's good to the sheep, even if the sheep gets lost, he'll find his way back home, right? You might have some moments. So my whole thing is, hey, keep a relation. They're going to have their ups and downs. Hey, look, in our school, have I had to let some kids go out of school? Yes. But I even some kids have let go, but they even came back and said, you know what? I kind of understood why you did it, Mr. Q, right? Because I was, really, I was just like, look, do you understand? Like, well, this bothers me. So I'm trying to explain why we have to let this go, right? And then again, Allah forgive, maybe one or two, I might, maybe they did that, right? And that's always in the back of my head. I'm like, yeah, Allah, let me not be a source for them to leave the deen. All right. So, and those are things. And that's why for Islamic school, I think is always challenging because if someone has a bad experience at Islamic school, it's not just the school. Like you go to another school, you're like a math reading, like, okay, I was there. It's also that's how you think you're associating not just the school, but the religion with it too. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So we gotta put it on like, take it to the next whole level of Ihsan perfection because there's no room for that kind of thing, right? So, and that's where the beauty is. So even now, when this message came of the Prophet Sallallahu, what's the first accusation they'll try to do? His character. But that's where even his character played such a big part because they were trying to like, okay, how do I justify this, right? So that's that this idea of constantly how important relationships and social SEL, social emotions become really big now. This thing our prophet taught us for so many years. I mean, I love,
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for sharing, giving us a peek behind the curtain and sharing that, some of these alumni, they've come full circle and some, have come back and they're not only offering these positive statements regarding their experiences, but they're putting in the time, they're putting in the effort. You have the volunteers and you have those who are working there. God bless all of them and may Allah accept from everyone. I know time is limited, but as we wrap up, is there one last gem from the book that you want to highlight? One last point, story? It could be something big, it could be something very small that maybe the average person may not
yeah, yeah.
notice. Go ahead.
No, I'm kind of thinking about the way the whole idea, if I had to encompass, right? My whole thing is that our deen is about self-reflection, constant learning, helping others, like God's creation, and constant remembrance of God, right? Like this idea of worship. So worship at all facets, right? So I think that kind of like, if I had to say like what I after writing all this to say, man, this is it's a deen of action. It's a faith in action, and how important the idea of character and akhlaq is and tarbiyah is. And so for all of us who are adults here, what you do, and this is what I'm gonna end with, what you do plays a big part of what kids are going to learn, right? Greatest form of learning is through interaction. And so if you want these kids to be people who pray, then they have to see you pray and people around you who pray, right? That means the sahaba you have around there, right? If you want them to be readers, not even Quran, just like learning, then they have to see, like, I could never complain to my parents about Sunday school and stuff because they themselves taught Sunday school, or they themselves were also doing tafsir classes too. So there's nothing I could say, like, you're telling me to do it, you don't do it yourself, right? And that's what
No,
the prophet always did, right? He was helping with the hijrah. The prophet made him go through it. Building of the ditch, the prophet was part of it. So even all the prophets had to go through the same struggles as everyone else.
mhm, yeah, that's leading by example.
Yeah.
Leading by
Yeah.
example, rolling up your own sleeves, figuratively and literally in the case of the prophet, helping in the
I
in
know.
the figurative trenches, and then literally the trench at the top of the battle of the trench. Subhanallah. Jazakallah khair for the time, for the effort. Last question. Where can we find your book? There are probably several options, but what do you want to
Ikra bookstore is going to be like right now because we just received them just this week. There was a whole kind of delay, but alhamdulillah, we just got them. So Ikra bookstore has them, inshallah ta'ala. Please, if just make dua if there's there, and if you want to purchase one, and if you're a school and you want to buy in bulk, please tell them, and we could get, we want to give it at such a reasonable price that that they have. I know they're trying to get us to sell it for like $10, but for bulk rates we could give even cheaper, right? Because
so
the idea. Yeah.
so right now I'm not teaching or working in an Islamic school, but I do work with refugee youth at Rida. So and we have weekly youth halaqas. So if we were gonna get, what would bulk be? Is it like
Yeah, so
minimum?
if you just contact them directly, yeah, we're trying to say $7 kind of thing, $6, right? Even if it's like a Belgo thing, even five. We're just trying to. The idea is to get it out there. But sometimes we work with bookstores. But I told them, hey, look, I need this. I don't care about the profits for myself. I just need to make sure. So there's room for playing around. That's why with the group I'm working with, they're kind of being flexible about, hey, if I ask someone group, please make a discount. Yeah, so please talk to us directly. You can talk to me directly. Someone who's from Ihsan Foundation, the sheikh has my number too, and I'd be glad to talk to them to make sure something happen. And then please support the foundation, Ihsan Foundation. May Allah reward their work. And inshallah ta'ala, Allah accept all their efforts too.
I mean, from all of us, Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair again for your time, for the effort, the presentation, the book. May Allah put more barakah, more blessing in this book than you could have ever imagined. May Allah make it a means of your entry, you and your loved ones, into Jannah, inshallah. And hopefully, we all get to see each other there.
Oh
Inshallah,
yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
all of us there,
Um,
and with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. Jazakallah khair. We'll go ahead and wrap up. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. Jazakallah khair. See you inshallah. Assalamu
وعليكم السلام شيخ.